Now, the story of Job is one of my favourites in the Bible. I have many favourites, so I guess I like it all. So I'm going to show you how Job isn't some mysterious character that just kind of pops up out of nowhere. He is actually the grandson of Abraham. So just using my 1611 King James Bible, I'll show you obviously the text, and then I'll show you exactly how I've come to that conclusion that Job is the grandson of Abraham. So we need to begin by going to Genesis chapter 25, and the summary of chapter 25 is that it's going to talk about the sons of Abraham with Keturah. Obviously most people talk about Abraham's children, Isaac and Ishmael, which he had with Sarah and the handmaid. But after the death of Sarah, Abraham marries again, and so he marries this lady called Keturah. And as you can see in Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 to 4, they talk about the children that he had with Keturah. But there's a little extra piece which people miss, and so I'll just talk you through it. So it says in verse 4 that it says first of all that he had children with Keturah, and in verse 2 it says that the children were Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, and Ishbak and Shua, and so that lists 5 sons there, and then it goes on for other grandsons coming off those sons. But what it then goes on to tell you is that Abraham, his son Midian from Keturah, also had 5 sons. So you've got Midian having Ephah, Hanok, Abida, and Eldar. And it says all these were the children of Keturah. But what it doesn't say is that all of these were all the children that Abraham had with Keturah. It just says that those 5 were all children that Abraham had with Keturah. And this is what happens with the Bible, and it invites you to look a little bit further rather than just reading the text and say, oh, well, he had 5 sons with Keturah. So if I go to page 7 of the genealogies, which are in the 1611 King James Bible, we'll see at the top there's Abraham and Keturah. And with all the genealogies, just in case there's any mix up on names, because obviously some names are repeated through the Bible and then they're different characters, there's a book reference just to make sure that we're talking about the right people. So Genesis 25:1, there's Abraham with Keturah. And these are the 6 children that they had: Shua, Ishbak, Midian, Medan, Zimran, and Jokshan. And then you can see from the offshoot of Midian that it then goes down. And you can see the 5 sons here, which are listed in Genesis 25:4. So Ephah, Hanok, Abida, Eldar. But you can also see this big line coming off Midian because he starts the Midianites. That's one of the tribes of the east, and at the head of the Midianites is Job. So there we go. So what we can see there is that Abraham had a child called Midian. Midian had 5 sons listed in Genesis 25:4, but he also had this 6th son coming off the spur of Midian, and that was Job. And so that's who Job is. He's the grandson of Abraham. It's just not written in the text, but if you have the genealogies, you can see that it's Job. And just in case there's any doubt, underneath Job's name, it gives the book reference. So you notice it doesn't say Genesis in there, it just says Job 1:1. But you can clearly see that it's coming from the same line. And then to further confirm it. If you look coming down from Job, it then lists his 3 daughters, which are then, if you go to Job chapter 42 verse 14, right at the end of Job, when all his family's been redeemed and restored by God, there's his 3 daughters, Jemimah, Keziah and Keren Hapuk. So we're definitely talking about the right Job. We're not talking about anyone else. Job is the grandson of Abraham. And just on this side of the family as well, you've also got, if I just zoom in here, you'll notice then coming down, you've got Jethro, and Jethro, if you're familiar with the Bible, that was Moses' father-in-law. So you can see coming off Jethro is then Zipporah, wife to Moses, and then her reference in Exodus 2:21 there. So there's this section of Abraham's family which went off to the east, which then became the Midianites. And of course, the irony is that they then become sworn enemies of Jacob's other offspring, the Midianites, and I think it's the Amalekites. They cause all kinds of problems for the Israelites when they're basically on their Exodus journey. So yeah, and just at the bottom, I'll give you a little additional reading from here, which just once again confirms everything that I've said. And it says, from the presence of Isaac, Abraham sent his sons by Keturah, whereof Midian was one, into the east. And then it gives Genesis 25, chapter 6. From thence are the Midianites mentioned in Judges. And in the east, Job is the greatest. Job 1:3. That's where Job being the greatest is first mentioned. He held the true worship of God, as did Raguel and Jethro, who are then mentioned in Exodus 18:11, a sure testimony of Abraham's care towards his family, as the Lord hath spoken. His story and afflictions are thought to be before that Moses penned the law, otherwise it had not been lawful for him to have sacrificed. So yeah, Job does a sacrifice, but this is before the days of Moses, because he's not even met Zipporah. And then it says, in Egypt all had sinned and were defiled with the idols of that land. And that's mentioned in Ezekiel. Then did Satan accuse the earth of impiety. And that's obviously within the story of Job, where God's basically saying Job is wonderful and upright and has full trust, but Satan then says, well, that's only because you've given him everything. I bet if I take things away from him, he'll curse you. And that's where the trial of Job starts. So Satan accuses the earth of impiety, yet Job was just and knew that his Redeemer lived and believed the resurrection to life. And there we go. So a nice little extra bit if you weren't aware of who Job was, and there's lots of discussions where people say that his book seems out of place. He's not out of place at all. He's the grandson of Abraham and a key character, and certainly for middle-aged people like me, one of the most inspirational stories in the Bible, where you can have everything, lose everything, but the game's not over until God's restored you back to the full reckoning. So there we go. Hope you like that video, and I've got tons more using the 1611 Bible. Cheers.